How to access the Emergency Response Data Platform. Any public safety agency can access life-saving emergency data through the RapidSOS Emergency Response Data Platform. There are two ways of doing so. RapidSOS Portal is a powerful web-based tool that enables you to manage emergencies and access location and supplemental data for every call in your jurisdiction. Signing up for RapidSOS Portal is easy and only takes a few minutes. In addition to emergency management tools and data, RapidSOS Portal includes a training platform as well as administrative tools to manage user permissions, track usage, and analyze trends in your agency. To learn more and sign up for RapidSOS Portal, please visit rapidsosportal.com. RapidSOS also integrates with every major CAD, CPE, mapping, or other public safety softwares. With an integration, you can receive RapidSOS data through your existing workflow, and you won't need any additional screens, tabs, or windows. To learn more about integrations, visit rapidsos.com/public-safety-partners.
Welcome to the 2024 Winter and Spring ENP Study Group. This is week 5. I should just call them sessions because sometimes the weeks are off, but nonetheless, we're going to go over radio communications as well as I think we should be going over them. So I don't think today's going to be a super long session, but I do need to go over a few housekeeping things that I go over every week, just in case someone stumbles upon this video on YouTube and they want to become a part of the live study group that is currently going on. Started October 6th. It will end on January 19th. With that said, you can register to become part of the live study group anytime up until probably January 18th and be able to attend the live sessions. Once you register by going to the website at onscenefirst.com/training/study ENP or head on over and scan that QR code there to the left. You will be added to a Google group that we use for all of the communications, as well as a Google Calendar invite. With that said, if you have registered and you have not received access to the Google group or the invite, please email info@onscenefirst.com and my assistant will get you figured out as to why you didn't receive that access, because sometimes government emails get blocked by my email. If you're watching this after January 19th and you are planning on taking the February exam or the April exam in 2024, you can head on over to that same website, onscenefirst.com/training/study ENP, or scan the QR code and you can there will be a link there, or sorry, a form to fill out to gain access to all of this session's materials. And then that way you can prepare for those exams. And then the next study group, the next live study group will be on March 8th. It'll start then. And that study group will be for those that are taking the exam in the summer of 2024 or the fall of 2024. So there's that. We are also happy to be partnering with National Emergency Number Association Ontario with our neighbors to the north in Canada. And so I have been in communications with some of the folks, and it looks like we're going to be planning that session towards the end of the study group. So once I have the confirmation on that particular date for the Canadian information study group, I will make sure that it gets added to the slide and everyone is aware. There are some questions that are different for the Canadian exam, and we're going to go ahead and partner with them so we can get them the information as well. So we're not doing duplicate efforts. But if you want more information on the NENA Ontario, you can scan the QR code or head on over to their website that's listed there. Huge thank you to our premier study group sponsor, RapidSOS. Many of you know that's where I got my start on the vendor side or the commercial side or the dark side, whatever you want to call it. And Rapid SOS is providing amazing technology to our 911 centers. And if you're not using their technology, you need to head on over to rapidsos.com and tell them Tracy sent you and thank them for allowing me to be able to do this particular study group. I want to talk briefly about our scholarships through On Scene First. Thank you to our vendor partners that are sponsoring our program to be able to award 7 scholarships at this time for the NINA ENP exam fee. So we will cover the cost for the folks that are chosen, and they will get their exam fee paid for. So Rapid SOS, Responder Services Consulting, and LB Communications have generously sponsored so we can give those 7 away. If you are a commercial partner and you would like to add some of those sponsorships, you can just scan that QR code right up in the right-hand corner and reach out and let me know. The sponsorship scholarship will be available, or you can submit up until December 8th. Once we get those notifications, then we will be going through them, and then we will make our decision. That date, I just took this screenshot from the website from the last time. So it says we will be awarding the 7 on February 24th, 2023. That's not the case. It'll be in December, about 2 weeks before you actually have to register for the exam. So you can head on over to the website there, onscenefirst.com/scholarship, or scan the QR code up in the right-hand corner, and it will get you right to that page. There are also some other scholarships. Texas NINA, Tennessee NINA, TINA, and 911 Wonder Woman also have scholarships that are available to folks. So not knowing the timing and when they offer them, head on over to their website and you can check them out. So there you go. As a shameless plug, I do want to share that On Scene First has a store located on our website. I am super excited that I finally settled on a challenge coin design. They are available on the website there, onscenefirst.com/store. I do also have my stickers that are available there and some shirt designs. There will be more in the foreseeable near future. So if anyone's looking for anything for Telecommunicator Week, just know that the majority of, and well, I say the proceeds, I'm not going to say the majority, but the proceeds that I receive from selling these items always goes right back into the 911 heroes that are, you know, doing their thing every day to save lives on both sides of the call. So just wanted to throw that out there in case folks didn't know that it existed. So thanks. You can hear my dog barking in the background. I'm going to wait a minute. He might stop. If not, I might have to go let him out. Because unfortunately, I am here alone. All right. So we're going to jump into the public safety radio communications. Not a ton of heavy lifting. I do know that there are questions on the exam that cover the radio, and I have tried to be pretty specific in the feedback that I've got in the areas in which they will be pulling questions from. Some of it just like normal. I have the study guide and I have the body of knowledge, and we have the NINA knowledge base, which has replaced the NINA glossary. And hold on one second. Sorry, it sounds like the dog's right outside my door. But the NINA knowledge base has replaced the NINA glossary of knowledge. And so if you go into our drive folder, I do have a written version there of the glossary of terms from before, but it's not really, you can't access it any longer. They have moved over to an online knowledge base. But what I do know that all the terms that were in the glossary have not all been moved over to the knowledge base. So just know that that is available for you to look at. And some of these definitions are in there, some of them are not. So, all right, let's get started. So we're going to start with basic radio communications. Public safety LMR, which stands for Land Mobile Radio Systems, must be licensed. And so here in the United States, it is the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, that licenses our radio frequencies. In Canada, it is the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, and the acronym for that is ISED. So US folks, you need to know FCC. Canadian folks, ISED. And I know that our Canadian friends will be also adding that to their presentation as well. So anything that I mentioned, they'll have in their presentation as well. There are 3 particular areas in which we will start off with is first defining what a wave is, a radio wave. That is the electromagnetic radiation that is used for communication and carries information through the airwaves. Okay, so it's the oscillating. So when you look at this wave that is on the screen there, there are definitions that adhere towards each part of that round moving, I guess, or twisting of the information. And we'll break that down a little bit further in just a few minutes. A frequency refers to how fast the waves oscillate. I can't say that word very well. That's why I'm like cautious when I say it. I oscillate, how fast they spin around. And then radio bands are the specific ranges of frequencies grouped for communication purposes or applications. So we're going to kind of break down each one of these, but they're kind of the main components that we will need to focus on here as far as radio communications go. So the radio waves themselves are electromagnetic waves that travel through the atmosphere, which we just said. It's when voice is converted into electrical energy. So it starts off one way, goes through the air, and then when it reaches its destination, it is kind of turned back into the audio in which we hear on the other side of the radio. The wavelength depends on the frequency generated by the radio system. And we're going to get more into the lengths and et cetera. And I hope that some of the Tracyisms that I have come up with will help you remember which ones are which. So the lower the frequency, the greater the distance between the waves. And that's not something you're going to need to remember specifically, but some of the ways that I'm going to show you how you remember it, it might just automatically be visible for your brain to bring back in if necessary. Different waves travel various distances, and that's why we need to have different types of frequencies and bands and waves to be able to get the transmissions from one place to another. And there's different factors that are going to play into who gets what frequencies, etc. So I want you to consider that radio waves are like long distance runners. The longer the distance, the more strength you lose. Okay. So if you are a short distance runner, if you're, I remember in grade school, I was a whiz at the 50-yard dash, but you put me in cross country and I would probably die in a very short period of time. But when you think of a long distance runner, someone who is conditioned and this is something that it does on a regular basis, the longer they go, they will eventually lose strength. And over time, the signal will get weaker, but they can go for great distances. So just keep that in mind. The radio waves, they can go for great distances, but the longer they go, they're going to lose their strength and the signal is going to get weaker. So there are some things that we're going to need to put in place to make sure that we can get as far as we possibly can, or understand that we might not be using the radio signal that we need to be using. So how do we remember as far as the numbers go? Here's a little Tracy's tip to remember. The lower the frequency, the distance is greater between those waves. So when we talk about what a radio wave looks like, which we're going to show you some pictures in just a few minutes, remember that the lower the frequency, the greater the distance between those waves. So this is how I remembered it for my exam. Remember when you were a kid, you were lowered to the ground and you could run further. So the lower the frequency, the further the distance between the waves. So if it's described in the exam question, you'll know what I mean. If they will describe what the radio wave looks like, then you'll understand. The lower the frequency, the further the distance between the bands, the further you could run when you were a little kid, when you were lower to the ground. I know sometimes they won't make sense to you, but to me they do. And so I will share that with anyone. As far as the radio frequencies go, radio frequencies are a measurement representing the oscillation rate of the electromagnetic radiation spectrum or electromagnetic radio waves from frequencies ranging from 300 gigahertz to as low as 9 kilohertz. Now, with that said, that first measurement, I've seen different numbers in different places. I have seen the number 3, I've seen the number 10, and I've seen 9. So I'm going to share with you, just know that a lot of the cutoffs for the ranges when it comes to kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz is the number 3. So when I show you the actual frequency ranges, you'll see that there's a lot of 3s in there. In the majority of the materials that I have identified and found, it is 3. It's as low as 3 kilohertz. But the materials in our book, in our manual, says 9 kilohertz. So I don't think you're going to see a question that's going to contradict that type of situation. But if for whatever reason you missed by one question, I would question a question if it had anything to do with a 3 or a 9 or a 10. And the radio frequency refers to how fast that radio wave oscillates. That's what I'm gonna say, oscillates. If it's wrong, tell me it's wrong. If anyone wants to sound it out in the chat for me and they know how to better pronounce it, let me know. There's just some words I'm not good at. So when it comes to hertz, and I do recall there being some questions on the exam that had the little abbreviations on them, and I know that it was really confusing for me. I know it's less confusing for me now because I always try to find easy ways to remember things. But to understand first that a hertz is a unit of measurement used to quantify frequency, specifically the frequency of periodic events or vibrations per second. Okay, so that vibration, I'm doing this because I'm going to show you some images in just a couple of minutes. So when you think of a vibration, it's doing this. But kilohertz is measuring smaller distances. Megahertz, bigger different distances. And gigahertz, even much bigger vibrations per second, right? If you can't remember which one is in which order, because right here they're put in the order. So K for kilo, the K is usually associated with 1,000. So as a United member, I'm really close to being a 1K member. So when we talk about money and you have $1,000, someone might make reference and put 1K. So $1,000, K equals 1,000, M, a million, G, giga. Okay, so it's gigahertz. The giga is the metric measurement for billion. So 1,000, million, and billion. And I just realized I screwed that up. That G is supposed to be billion, not giga. So I will fix that on the PDF that you get in the drive. So K kilo, 1,000, M million, G billion. And now if that doesn't help to say, all right, well, if it's 1,000, a million, and a billion, we know they go in order, but you can't really put them in alphabetical order because that wouldn't make sense. So I'm going to give you a different way to remember it. K, kid. They're the smallest. M, mom. She's the next. She's next in line as far as size goes, right? And then G, grandparent. They're usually, say, grandfather, bigger. So kid, mom, grandfather. However it is that you need to remember them in order, because when I put up the next 1 or 2 slides, you're gonna see the breakdown in the ranges of frequencies. And I have a feeling there are some questions on there if I remember correctly. So this is the classifications of frequencies and the ranges in which public safety uses those different frequencies. Don't get nervous as to what you see on this page. I'm going to show you the 3 that are commonly used by public safety, and I'm going to make a big assumption that those are the ranges that you should familiarize yourself with. But I do want to point out that this chart in the study manual is what I was referring to, where you look at the classification, which is the very low frequency, VLF. In the manual, it starts at 10. In most other things that I see, it is 3. It starts with 3 kilohertz. So just keep that in mind. If you do see another number, and if you notice, all of these are 3, right? So 3 to 30, 30 to 300, 300 to 3, 3 to 30. And then if needed, if they are asking you any questions about the ranges, et cetera, I just put an R where it didn't belong because that's what I do. I'm from Massachusetts. Just remember the order in which the numbers are going in. So if it's kilohertz, there's smaller numbers that will eventually end up into a bigger number, right? And so if you look at the very low frequency, this is 3 kilohertz to 30 kilohertz. That's still in that smaller 1,000 auscultations a second. The low frequency is 30 kilohertz to 300 kilohertz. Medium frequency is 300 kilohertz to 3 megahertz. So it has now moved the kilohertz. It now moves over to a 3 because it is now in megahertz. Okay. And so on and so on and so on and so on. So if that's how you want to remember it, but these are the ones that you should be familiar with. Low frequency, which in the fire service and police way back, we would refer to that as low band. Their frequency ranges are 30 kilohertz to 300 kilohertz. And if you want to remember it, go back and ask someone on your fire department, what was their low band frequency? Because I'm sure everyone would have had one. Ours was 3352. And then you kind of look in that area. The next one is very high frequency, VHF. That frequency range is 30 megahertz which is the million, to 300 megahertz. Okay. And I can't remember what our frequency was there. I'm trying to remember. And then there is ultra high frequency, and that is 300 megahertz to 3 gigahertz. So I know our last police radio was 471 point something. We're now moving to digital, so that's going to change. But the low frequency, the very high frequency, and the ultra high frequency, LF, VHF, and UHF, probably concentrated. The questions are probably going to be concentrated on VHF and UHF. So you kind of need to know the differences between those. So let's break it down in Tracy terms. Very high frequency, if you notice, I'm going to use a flashlight to kind of create this illusion for you. First and foremost, the VHF wave, radio wave, is wide, and it goes much further than the UHF. And I'm going to show you a way to remember those in just a second, but let's learn about VHF. VHF low band for public safety includes 39 to 72 megahertz band, now used for intercity. Okay, so folks have probably moved to UHF, but they probably kept their VHF, not low band as in low band that we used to call it, but the lower band for public safety has now become VHF. Okay, these channels in this frequency range travel greater distances than those of higher frequencies. So when you look at the way this band looks, I want you to imagine having a radio wave and just grabbing the end of it right here, that little piece, and stretching it out. And so when you stretch it out, the spaces in between the waves are going to become much wider. Okay. So the channel in this frequency range travels greater distances than those in the higher frequencies. So when you go in that list, the list that I just showed you, VHF is coming before UHF. The VHF high band for public safety is 150 to 170 megahertz for their day-to-day communications. It is preferred by rural agencies as the VHF signals tend to produce better coverage on uneven terrain and wooded areas. Okay. It is broader. It is more spread out. Hence the reason why I'm showing you kind of this flashlight thing, right? So the wider the waves, the broader it is, and it's better coverage in uneven terrain and wooded areas. So I know that if I was to go in the woods right now, I would probably want, if I was going to refer it back to a VHF flashlight, the broader one, I want to be able to see a wide area, right? So I want to see that wide area. When I turn that flashlight on, I want that broad, wide range. The problem with this is when you have a broad, wide range, just imagine it spreading out all over your jurisdiction. It means that it could be susceptible or more susceptible to atmospheric skip. I remember back in our day, I used to hear folks talking about the Winn-Dixie. We don't have a Winn-Dixie here in Massachusetts. We were receiving skip from down south somewhere. So when we were on that VHF high band, that's what would happen. So one more way to remember which one is wide and which one is not, the V. See the V there? That's the Tracyism. So use these little tricks to bring back, as you're taking the exam, VHF, it's much broader. The V, much wider to fill in that broad cone of light, if you will. I know it may not make sense to you, but it makes sense to my brain. Hopefully, it makes sense to your brain. Now, the ultra high frequency, these ranges 400 megahertz, 500, 700, 800, 900. It's also used every day in public safety, but they may not be able to communicate as far as the lower frequency, but they are able to penetrate through buildings better. And so if you think about the cone in the first one and that wider area, you have to assume that when it's wider, it's kind of dispersed. But if you look at this flashlight, the UHF, you see that these waves are much closer together. Okay, so they're much closer together. I haven't taken the piece and stretched it out like in the other one. So when they're much closer together like that, just think of it this way. It's going to be more concentrated and it's going to be easier to go through buildings because it's much closer. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Can somebody tell me in the chat if I'm making sense? If you're picking up what I'm putting down? Because sometimes I feel like I'm talking, and because folks can't talk or ask questions, is this making sense to anyone besides me? I'm hoping that it is, so we'll continue on there. But if these don't resonate, then by all means, read through the definitions. Try to come up with a way. I was trying to think of a creative way. I was first going to go with fire hoses. Excellent, Terry. Thank you. So I was trying to think of like with fire hoses as well, because sometimes you have to, this is how my brain works. And maybe yours does, maybe it doesn't. Some folks are very technical, like very literal, where they have to just have the definition and they'll figure out how to understand it. Mine, I have to relate it to something else that would make sense. So before I did the flashlight thing, I was starting to go down the road of fire hoses, right? So when you have that fog pattern and it's really wide, again, it's very similar. But if I was to do a straight stream, I could, it's going to penetrate, it'll penetrate or imagine if you had a tower of blocks that you were going to knock over with the fire hose. And I had to choose. And I'm going to tell you this because it might make sense to somebody else, but I remember when we do musters or kids events and things like that, and they can play with the fire hose. Well, number one, we want to make sure that it's on some type of fog pattern, because if we put it on a straight stream, we may be picking the kid up off the other side of the park, right? So knowing that a straight stream is going to be able to be much stronger and penetrate through that pile of blocks much quicker, right? But the fog pattern, it's going to not be as strong, but it'll cover a wider area. So I was trying to go down that road. And so either way, whichever way you want to look at it, there you go. I'll just give you that. And then here's just another example, because I do know that there are some questions on differentiating between these two. I just don't know to what extent. So VHF, there we go. Longer wavelengths, greater the distance. Okay, so the longer the space is, the greater the distance. The UHF, they're higher, so they're closer together, so shorter the distance. And there you go. Way back in the day, public safety made use of the lower frequencies, but unfortunately, it resulted in interference. That was that atmospheric skip. As silly as it is, when I was looking for information on how to come back and explain this type of information that's in the manual, I found when we were changing over to our new frequencies. So Rochester's new independent UHF frequency, there it is, 471.425, is replacing the low band address of, which is frequency, not address, 3352, which it shared with other communities elsewhere, accounting for the feedback known as skip. Now, with that said, that's not really how it's worded. But if you notice, we're going from that much low frequency, low band 3352 to an ultra high frequency of 471.425. So there you go. Once we start to move to higher frequencies, it reduced the interference because it brought it in closer, if that makes sense, right? So the higher frequencies brings it in closer. It's that straight stream. It makes it easier to penetrate, brings it in closer. When we bring it in closer, we're not going to have as much interference from other places, especially if they have similar or the same frequencies, just in another part. But what we now need is I need that transmission to get to the other side of my town or maybe in the neighboring town. So that's where repeaters are going to come in and be needed. So we're going to talk about repeaters in just a little bit, but now we're going to break down the radio band part of it. Is bands are small sections of the radio communications spectrum where the FCC assigns its channels. The bands are groups of frequencies. So those groups of frequencies that you saw broke down a few slides ago, inside those frequencies, now there's smaller bands. Each band has a band plan dictating how it will be used and shared. So you can't just jump on and pick a frequency or pick a radio band. And so this is the United States frequency allocation radio spectrum. Now, with that said, you can't see what they all are, but just know that, which I don't fully understand, but there's only so much space on this spectrum. And so if this particular frequency uses up this much, well, that's all used up. We can't use it anymore. So we have to figure out a way to find another way to use that spectrum, because at some point there isn't going to be any more, and we're going to have to, oh, I know, change to something different, which is coming, because there's only so much space in these spectrums. Then there's signaling as far as radio goes. There's also signaling as far as telephone stuff goes, which we'll touch base on again a little bit later. But as far as radio goes, analog uses the vibration of voice to send voice to the transmitter. Digital voice is converted into digital signal using something that's called a voice coder or a vocoder. And that's in another area as far as equipment goes. We'll talk more about that. But this is how we break it down, or this is how Tracy breaks it down. Analog, like cursive writing, is smooth and continuous, but it can be a little messy. But when you think about cursive writing, it's smooth and continuous. The only problem is that some folks that don't know how to read cursive. So it's not something that made sense, right? So some folks can read cursive, but not everybody can read cursive. And that's what analog is it's very smooth, it's continuous speech, but it's also considered messy handwriting. Digital is clear and distinct codes, or like a neatly typed document. That's why when typewriters came out, teachers was like 10 pages, type, double space, or whatever, right? Because it was much easier to read. It was clearer, and most folks could read. If you could read, you could read printed language. So analog is smooth, continuous speech or messy handwriting. And digital is clear, distinct codes or neatly typed. So digital codes are more precise and can offer a clearer communication with less interference compared to analog. Hope that makes sense. So now we're going to talk about the different radio types as far as conventional and trunking systems. I will tell you, when I took my exam, I was not picking up what they put down here. So what does Tracy do? She tries to figure it out so she can explain it to others. So conventional radio systems, they're using dedicated channels that are manually selected. Unfortunately, you must wait your turn to speak. And if you lived in my world, in my fire department, they don't always wait to speak, and they were stepping all over each other. There's only a limited number of channels in that conventional radio system, and it's better for smaller organizations. So my Rochester Fire Department, we're small, we're rural. We only have 35 people on the fire department. So the chances of folks speaking on the radio all the time at the same time is slim. So it made sense to have a conventional radio system. It's more common in rural areas for that reason. So what this means is channel 1 is dedicated to the fire department, channel 2 is dedicated to the ambulance folks, and channel 3 would be dedicated to the police folks. So that meant fire stays on fire, EMS stays on EMS, and police stay on police. We're starting to move towards a trunking system, which is going to look a little bit different. But when I mention the word trunking, I want you to know that there are two types of trunking: phone and radio. And we are going to go over both of them. So today we're going over radio, and eventually we're going to go over phone. So what does that mean? When you take your exam, make sure you are understanding the question as it pertains to which type of trunking it is talking about. Don't make an assumption that it's trunking on the radio side and the question is actually relative to the phone side. So just use caution there. So as far as trunking goes, before 1996, which is the year I was a baby dispatcher, it was relatively easy to get a frequency. With the advent of cellular devices, personal communication systems, pagers, radios, the government had to begin auctioning off frequencies to the highest bidder. So I want this batch. I will pay you for it. It's mine. So nobody else can take it away from me. These auctions made billions of dollars for the federal government. Trunking is a way of conserving that precious radio spectrum that we are losing over time. Think of it as a computer-aided radio system. Any agency can use any available channel. The control channel decides which one is going to be used. So you get a bank of channels. So we'll use, in this case, 3 channels. So I have the police department, the fire department, and an ambulance service in the Acme town. So I need a batch of radio to be able to let these folks communicate. So what is that going to look like? Are they all going to be stepping all over each other? Am I going to be able to know who's who, what's what they're doing? And this is, I'm going to give you an image that will show you in just a few minutes the differences between the conventional and the trunked radio system. A trunked radio system helps with the lack of frequency space since more devices are using them. In a trunked radio system, all users share the same radio frequencies. They will just be put in a queue and be able to be the next in line, if you will. Some departments will use talk groups. So it's almost like, yeah, you do have fire that's separate, you do have police that's separate, and maybe you have your ambulance service that is separate as well. They're all on the same frequency. They're just in talk groups. So if I'm on the fire department, it's going to grab the next open spot in my talk group if I'm talking to another fire unit, and so on and so forth. Trunked radio systems are efficient use of the spectrum for two reasons. Number one, most conversations are short, or they should be anyway, and rarely do they all need to talk at the same time. Sometimes they try, but they don't have to. So here's your example. Disregard the word highway and back roads. Those aren't supposed to be there yet. I forgot to hit the animation button there. Focus on the conventional picture of the folks at the bank and the trunked picture of the folks at the bank. Conventional is there are three separate lines, three separate lanes. And if I get in this lane on the right, if I get in this lane all the way on the right, I have to go to this teller. If this teller opens, I can't just walk over here and cut in front of this guy because this guy's been waiting. So it makes sense to get in this line, right? But you can't, because if this is police and this is fire and this is EMS, you have to stay in the lane in which you're going to speak on that radio. Just like this guy may do cashing checks, this guy may do loans, and this guy may do something else. You have to stay in your lane. The trunked system is one line. And whichever teller opens up first, that next person gets to go. They're not going to have to wait. They're just going to be moved into the queue, and then they can do their business. So I want to break it down one more way, because I like to have examples. I want you to think of conventional trunking as a back road and trunked as the highway. And here you go. So on a conventional system, we got one road. If this is a one-lane road, take out that yellow dotted line. If it's a one lane road, I don't really have a way to pass the person that's in front of me. If they're going 30 miles an hour and I can't move to the right or to the left, then I just got to stay behind that person and wait until I get to my destination. The trunking system is more like a highway. We have 3 lanes. And if I need to get somewhere, I can move over into another lane. And if that lane's blocked, I can move over into another lane. And maybe even the breakdown lane or the shoulder on the other side of the road. The bottom line is the trunking system gives us more options to get that radio transmission through without getting the system bogged down. So the different types of radios. First are mobile radios. Mobile radios are larger. They're more powerful than portable radios, which we'll talk about portable radios. They're usually installed in vehicles, but they can also be used as base stations in fixed locations. That's what we had. I didn't know any better until I started traveling around the country, seeing all the different 911 centers. We had base radios in our 911 center. They have an external antenna for better range and connectivity, and they're used in the vehicle or the fixed communication device, usually used for public safety, but the range that they have is probably where you want to be able to differentiate. The range of a mobile radio typically has a longer range compared to that of a portable radio. That's a given. That makes sense, right? They can transmit over great distances due to their higher transmitting power and the use of external antennas allowing communication over larger geographic areas. These are kind of simple terms, but it's good to know. The portable radio, they're handheld devices for easy carrying and individual use. They're usually lightweight. The antenna is actually in or on the device. They have rechargeable batteries. They can easily be carried. Their intended use is for personal or localized communication, also used by public safety, etc. Their range is typically limited because they're smaller radios, and it can vary based on the environment. If you're in the basement of a building, your portable may not work. If you are out in the outskirts of town, away from any type of tower or repeater, your portable may not work. Okay. We now bring in the use of repeater systems. Repeater systems allow the radio system to provide coverage over a greater distance. It allows the portable and mobile users to hear the other users that are further away. So it allows you to transmit further distances, and it allows you to hear further from further distances. It uses a base station and uses separate frequencies to transmit and receive. So if I remember correctly, they're called a PL tone or something like that. That's not relevant at this point, but it's a similar frequency, but it's one transmits and one receives. And the radio receives or hears the base transmitter repeating the transmission. And that is one of the reasons why we encourage folks, when we teach them how to use the radio, that they key the radio, they wait a second, allow the repeater to be engaged, and then send your message. It is another reason why we use words like affirmative and negative and not yes and no. Because if we use yes or we use no and the repeater has not engaged, those transmissions could be lost. So you want longer words in those particular situations. Repeater systems can be either large powered base stations or smaller powered mounted on the vehicle. Most folks are using repeaters that are on towers in their geographic location somewhere. So when the call is placed from the portable on the left, it hits the repeater on the tower in the middle, and then it's able to be sent to the portable on the right. Most radio equipment, both mobile and portable, can be programmed with simplex channels that use the base station to transmit the frequency. It's also called a talk around. So if you're on the fire ground and you don't want to excessively use a frequency that may be used by other departments, they can turn their channel and they can get on talk around. And what talk around does is it stops that transmission from going to the repeater and sending it a further distance. So it's only in a small geographic area. Simplex transmits and receives on the same frequency. It allows communication without using the repeater. So when we go back to that same frequency thing, let me just touch back on that. When you use the repeater, you're using two different frequencies, one to transmit and one to receive. But when you move to the talk around type channel, it now becomes simplex. So it's talking and receiving on one frequency. It allows communication without using the repeater. It can only communicate with those in a very small area, and it could be considered like a walkie-talkie. Our satellite radio systems, these systems are designed to receive signals transmitted from satellites in orbit around the Earth. And we know that there's many satellites out there that are being utilized. The satellite receivers provide another way of achieving greater signal reception. Some places we don't have signal reception, right? So some of our cellular devices are now starting to be able to use satellite services if they should need to dial 911 if a network signal is not available. So that's cool. The satellite receivers receive the signal from a portable or mobile within proximity and sends the signal to a central controller via a microwave or a landline, which we talked about the signals. I think we already talked about the signals. Maybe we didn't. Yeah, when we talked about microwave signaling. The controller selects the best audio signal from the satellite receiver with the highest quality signal. And it's similar to a voting system or a voting receiver. So you may see the term voting signal or voting receiver. It is very similar to how the satellite system works. There's just one kind of difference. And that difference is the voting systems have the multiple receivers placed in the area in which they are. They're not actually utilizing satellite services. So voting receiver systems are used in land-based radio communications, the networks, especially when there is multiple receivers and multiple transmitters in use. They typically involve multiple receivers placed strategically across that area. I'm not going to go ahead and read all of this. Just know that they are used in public safety communications in some areas, especially areas where we have bad signal reception. So you could kind of think of them as mini repeaters, if you will. They're just using a little bit of a different technology there. And then the term simulcast refers to the simultaneous broadcast of the same program, message, or content across multiple radio stations or transmitter sites. In the study manual, it says it refers to the broadcast of blah, 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 blah on the same frequencies. I am putting this here because I am not sure that is 100% correct. There is some terminology or language that refers to being able to simulcast on the same frequencies. But to me, the definition of simulcast is being able to call up multiple frequencies using something called a gateway or some type of technological piece of equipment that will allow me to key one button and simultaneously broadcast a message over several frequencies. So I'm not sure if that's a typo in the manual, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. And by simulcasting, it gives you the ability to share robust information on a widespread system. You reach more people in a shorter period of time. And then the last stuff we're going to talk about in this section is ROIP, Radio over Internet Protocol. When I was talking about kind of those frequencies and how at some point we're going to run out of frequencies and we're going to have to move towards something else, this is where we're going to be moving to. ROIP facilitates integrating traditional radio communication with modern IP-based networks, enabling a more flexible, efficient, and versatile communications solution. Okay, so they are integration. It is taking the radio networks, the frequencies there, and it's integrating them with the internet-based networks. They have to have a gateway functionality, just like we're going to see. Gateway is a term I talked about before. I'm going to talk about again when we talk about next generation 911. The gateway functionality, it basically allows you to connect an analog radio, digital radio. You can take this information and kind of change it into what you need to for it to be able to cross over into that ROIP environment. By doing so, it's going to extend the reach and flexibility, just like our next generation systems that are on an ESI net, etc. And then it can also have other features and benefits like group calling, individual calling, text messaging, and either integration with other data systems. Bottom line, anything we move to an internet-based anything is going to provide flexibility, scalability, and the ability to interface with different radio systems and devices. Not everybody can move to ROIP, so there has to be gateways that block off that place where one changes to another and then allows it to play nice in the same sandbox. So there you go. So with that, that is all we have for today. Students, you will get out of class early. And like I said, over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be creating a couple of recorded sessions to get us caught up to where we need to be to make up for the sessions that I have missed. And as usual, here is my contact information, social media, and a quick contact form. If you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can scan that QR code to reach me pretty quickly. And if you are on Facebook and you are in public safety, join us in the On Scene First Safety Net group. That's a safe place for mental health and wellness conversations. And until next time, heroes, stay safe, stay strong, stay here. We need you. And if nobody has any questions, go have a fun Friday night if it is, in fact, your Friday.